Lawyers who put together wills? What is the craziest/oddest thing someone wanted to put in theirs? Story 1. This one isn't necessarily crazy, just an interesting glimpse into the mind of a kind old woman in her 90s. My aunt and uncle, both were more like parents and incredibly beautiful people, passed away within a few weeks of one another. When my uncle became ill, the aunt tried to work on a will with her long-term lawyer, but she was kinda just old and out of it. Her main concern the entire time was small knickknacks like a jar of pennies she wanted a distant cousin to have, or a used jacket from the 70s she bequeathed to a sister-in-law. It was quite touching how much time she spent carefully considering each item and who would get it. Most of the items were used and didn't even really hold any sentimental value. She just wanted them to go to good homes. When she passed away, everyone knew exactly who was getting each odd item. The real kicker is when the lawyer told the primary beneficiaries that she never got around to the bigger assets and all that jazz. She basically told the lawyer, "Pay for our funeral and anything we owe, and then family members X, Y, and Z can figure out the rest." It ended up being millions in homes, lakefront property, jewelry, antique firearms, vehicles, life insurance policies, stocks, bonds, gold coins, etc., etc. Luckily, the family is very close, and everything went off without a hitch. They were amazing people who wanted to keep family items in the family. They just didn't put that much weight on their incredible wealth. They also hid their wealth amazingly. We all knew that they were very comfortable, but no one had any idea they were deep into 8-figure assets. It was just funny to see a random niece get a set of plastic cups, worn dance shoes, and a check for $125,000. Story 2. I read a lot of estate documents as part of my job. There is so much subtle shade in them occasionally, they can be pretty entertaining. One super wealthy lady had a huge section for the care and well-being of her pets, with primary and successor caretakers, a certain amount of money from the trust for care and feeding of each pet. One pet owner might receive $3,000 a month to take care of one of her pets after she passed, and certain stipulations on how they were to be cared for. While some might see it as excessive, the language and stipulations she had, and how they were referred to, showed that she really, really loved her pets. In that same will and trust, she also left a slew of people only $1, so that there would be no chance they could take the trust to probate court. The basis that they were merely forgotten. That part had so much subtle shade, a lot of, they know what they did, they are well aware of their guilt in the matter, etc. She split up about $2 million among 5 or 6 different animal rescues and animal welfare charities. It was around 200 pages long, and I swear I read the entire thing just for the sheer entertainment value. Story 3. I can't find it, but I know I've got it saved somewhere. There was a case my supervisor solicitor told me about during my internship. There was a woman from a very conservative family who had a live-in female companion. She had quite a bit of money from a previous marriage and was unfortunately very unwell, matter of when, not if. She could not leave it to her companion because same-sex partnerships weren't recognized in either marriage nor de facto status at the time. You could, however, leave money for the carer of a pet, including living expenses for the duration of the pet's lifetime. The family agreed not to contest the will on this because how long could an animal live? It was better than people finding out the scandalous truth. There were even documents showing where they felt they were being very generous about the whole thing. Remember how she was rich? In a darn gangster move, she imported a specific breed of tortoise which can live well past 100 and needs minimal care. The stipend for the tortoise kept her partner quite well looked after for the remainder of her years. Family couldn't contest it because they'd shoot any chance of money in the far, far future after agreeing to terms. Snarfed loudly at the end. Not ashamed. Story 4. What is unfortunate is when you find out the will/trust was written terribly by a hack lawyer, and now that the person is dead, it's too late to fix it. Here's an example. A woman had 3 kids. 2 were okay, but the third cared for her for years until she died. The mom wanted to give most of her money to the kid that put their life on hold to care for her, so her will basically said to liquefy all assets, give $100,000 each to the other kids, then everything else to the kid that helped her. Only problem was, after all her healthcare expenses, her assets totaled about $225,000. Dying is expensive. So her favorite kid got $25,000, while the other 2 got the $100,000. If her lawyer had written the will with percentages, her favorite kid would have gotten more like she wanted, but because they used concrete numbers, that's what had to be handed out. Another, more general example. It is unfortunate when everyone finds out dad was too lazy to change the beneficiary on his life insurance, 401k, etc. When the horrible ex-wife gets everything, and wife number 2 and the kids get nothing, just because he never took the time to update a little paperwork. Story 5. Yeah, reading the will isn't really a thing here either. You just call the notary, they check the National Register, and the family comes in for a meeting to discuss legal matters. The saddest one for me was the longest living parent passing away, changing their last will on their deathbed, literally a few days before their death. They disowned one of their children, because said child was gay and they didn't approve of their life choice. It completely destroyed the children left behind and their family relationship. They were thick as thieves, and this completely destroyed their bond, broken beyond repair. I tried to mediate as best I could, but it got so ugly. Please, for the love of God, think about what you leave behind. Because said parent is no more yet, is solely responsible for wrecking the bond between their children. Story 6. I work for a lawyer who does wills. We've had a lady put in her will that one of her adult sons was not to receive his share until he visited a dentist, and the other son lost 70 pounds. Another lady put in her will that she wanted her cats cremated with her when she died. Told her that's not going to happen. Human remains and animal remains do not get cremated at once. So she settled on cremated separately, and joined together, then buried together. Typically wills are about 10 pages, for the average person. We had a lady who had a 56-page will. She detailed everything from her house to people wooden ladle to item, toilet paper holder to item, magazine basket to item, etc. For every single item in this lady's house. We had a man put in his will that his family was to go to the zoo immediately after his burial that day. We thought that was more heartwarming. We had a lady that told us to put in her will that she wanted to be buried on her property next to her husband. She lived on a small rural property, totally illegal to have human remains buried there. Refused to tell us whether her husband was cremated or not, and had dictated that she did not want to be cremated. Edit. Her husband had died 5 or 6 years prior. So it's not as though it was 50 years where things like that may have been a little overlooked. We work with many people from a certain religion. A lot of people we do wills for leave at least 90% of their estates to the church instead of their families. Story 7. Estate lawyer here. I could tell so many stories. Sisters fighting over deceased brother's dining room table, ending in an accusation that one had murdered her own husband. True believers who were convinced the rapture was imminent and only saw the value of completing their estate plan when I explained the mess those of us left behind would have to deal with, including their stuff. A guy who got married days before his death to a longtime girlfriend, long story, did a will, disinherited several kids but not all, and somehow everything worked out okay with minimal disagreement. Several stories where a family member is a lawyer who practices in another area of law in another state, or doesn't practice at all. Guaranteed craziness. I could go on and on. It's the absolute best line of work, super fulfilling, great stories, get to know families, and walk meaningful paths alongside them. Story 8. Not a lawyer, but an estate planning paralegal for many years. I've read, drafted or executed thousands of wills and trusts with clients. My first nitpicky comment is that the common belief that lawyers actually assemble the whole family and hold a reading of the will is entirely a construct of TV. You would never sit there and just read a will to people. It's mostly a bunch of legalese about bonds and payment of taxes and the powers of the executor. Only a very small portion of the will actually pertains to distributions, and in many cases it's just a paragraph stating that everything goes to the spouse if living, otherwise equally to the kids, or to the trust, which then says it all goes to spouse then kids. Believe it or not, they're usually pretty mundane. When strings are attached, it's usually just parents trying to make sure their kids go to college, or they get a smaller distribution, or just have to wait longer to get their money. People who don't have kids usually name about 24 beneficiaries, which is cumbersome and annoying, especially since a lot of times they don't even have much money to divide. People with kids almost always just leave the money to them equally. Probably the most disturbing thing I've seen is a couple different clients who included provisions to disinherit kids and grandkids if they married someone outside their race. That's their prerogative, and will serve them professionally, but we tended not to get too cozy or chatty at those signings. unlike with many of the nice clients with whom we would become friendly. Just get 'em in, get 'em out in those cases. Story 9. As a wills and estate lawyer, I very rarely had to document nominations for anything too weird, but a couple things stand out. If the task to get the nomination is too onerous, it can be contested by the nominee in court. The court will make it hard to respect the deceased wishes, but are generally reasonable. I sat in a case where a lady was left a significant sum by her Christian mother on the condition she divorced her Muslim/Islamic husband and shortly after remarry a Christian, along with some other similar crazy stuff. She took it to court and won fairly quickly. It helped that the nomination document was some of the most spite-filled nonsense I'd ever read. Please don't do this. On further reading, I was also disappointed that I probably couldn't make my future children travel around the world, solving a series of challenges for their inheritance. My favorite wills case established wills as gifts in Australia, meaning they can be refused. There was a very wealthy lady who loved children and left a couple million to a hospital. Said hospital was thrilled until they got to the terms and conditions which said for the care and feeding of babies of a certain race. The hospital didn't want the money with those conditions, but the executor tried to make them take it because that's their job. I don't know their own inclination. So it was taken to court, where it was decided that nominations were in the same classifications as an offer or gift which could be refused. The hospital returned that money back to the estate in 2 days. Love telling this story, and someone usually goes, "Hang on, didn't you say you can still take the money if the condition is too onerous?" I did, but 1. Old case, different times 2. Unfortunately, the condition was and is still considered not onerous at all. Think about it. Just personally abhorrent. 3. For such a significant amount, and such a clear condition in the will, it probably wouldn't have been worth the legal battle. Fun fact, kids. 80% of cases never make it to court. You don't want it to. Courts are difficult. And in my opinion, 80% of cases that do probably could have been resolved outside it. Story 10. Most of our wills we read we had written in the first place, so it was rare that there were any surprises. Also, for the most part, people already read the wills before they came to our office for the next steps. But there was the one. Man died with 3 sons. To the oldest, he had a paragraph written recounting a story where he had asked the oldest son what he wanted of some collection of tools in the shop, and the son had replied, "Nothing. It's all useless stuff." The paragraph concluded with, "I shall honor his wishes and give him nothing." To the middle son, he had a paragraph recounting a conversation where the middle son had asked if the dad had made plans for his burial and funeral, etc., to make sure they were paid up ahead of time, unlike some other relatives had done. "Since he is so worried about whether my funeral is paid for, I shall honor his wishes, and so my burial and funeral arrangements shall be paid out of his share of my estate." The youngest son had managed to not upset dad recently and would have gotten most of the estate. By the time we'd finished reviewing the will, the 3 agreed to just ignore it and divide everything equally among them, after paying all the bills, of course. Story 11. Not a lawyer, but worked for one specializing in contentious probate. Spanish family, 4 children, their mother died. 3 of the 4 had a will written in English, which they believed to be the correct one. Remaining 1 had a will written in Spanish dated about 3 years later. The 3 claimed that the other had forced the mother to make the Spanish will after she had lost capacity. The guy was a real difficult person. One of the 3 with the English will had terminal cancer. It was final wish to get mother's estate sorted before they passed. We were on tenterhooks throughout the case, rooting for them. Mediation happened and the case was eventually sorted. Client with cancer passed shortly after. The whole thing was just incredibly sad. After one death and knowing another was going to die, the family was so divided. Story 12. Years ago, there was a very wealthy businessman/investor from Texas who passed away. In his will was a message to his 2 adult children about how he raised them regarding money. He was frugal, watched every penny he spent, and insisted they do the same. He knew he had been probably too obsessive about this, so in his will he earmarked $100,000 to each of them that he insisted had to be spent foolishly on something he never would have approved of. To make up for all the times he criticized their spending in the past, his accountant would be the judge, to ensure that they were bad investments. I can't remember how the son spent it, but if I recall correctly, the daughter bought a yacht in a marina 1,000 miles away from her home, and she didn't like boats. Story 13. Yup, this was done to one of my dad's cousins. He was caught trying to steal a classic car out of the grandfather's garage. His grandfather was a well-respected drill sergeant and lived across the street from a bar frequented by old-timers near a base. He was seen breaking into the garage by over 30 people who knew, hey, someone who isn't Frank is touching Frank's Rolls-Royce, and blocked him in. He was left $1, a phone book, a box of used AA batteries, and the spare key to an Oldsmobile they sold in the 90s. Story 14. I am a qualified solicitor. My favorite two are, 1. A lady wanted to create a trust fund of £100,000 for her pet fish. When I asked if it was a special kind of fish, she confirmed it was just a normal goldfish, but she wanted it to be fed fresh avocado every day and be looked after by a local dog walker after she died. She was absolutely serious. 2. Another lady confessed she had a secret daughter, and she wanted to leave the daughter some money and photographs without the rest of her family finding out. Even her husband does not know. That will be a fun conversation when she passes away. Story 15. Not a lawyer yet, but one interesting case in inheritance law that I came across was the one of a super rich owner of a private bank, who left his shares to his sons under the condition and restraint that they will act as managers of the private bank, but with a personal liability concerning the bank's debt. So what he did was giving them the money and commit them to lifelong work in the bank, while putting their own assets at risk. So when one of the sons decided to sell his shares because he was old and sick, the courts had to decide whether he gets any money from the will. The condition was not fulfilled anymore as he gave up the manager position. One other son wanted to sell his shares. Of course, that would not have been allowed under the condition either. Story 16. Not a lawyer, but helped drive a dear elderly friend of mine to his appointments to have his will redone after his wife died. He was a member of a Veterans of Foreign Wars that was very badly mismanaged, to the point they were coming to him to bail them out of debt for thousands every other month. At the same time this was happening, the commander of that Veterans of Foreign Wars had his wife begging to borrow money for their personal account as well. He tried to have it put in his will that while he had planned on leaving the majority of his money to the Veterans of Foreign Wars, he could not in good faith leave the money, knowing it would be so badly mismanaged, and probably used to offset the addictions of people in charge. Attorney would not allow that, but he did agree to hold a letter with the man's explanation for after his death. I am assuming the attorney did send it, because I know the commander and his awful wife have been upset ever since. Story 17. Two sons of a really wealthy couple go to the family lawyer to have the will read. Lawyer is super nervous. He has known them both since they were kids. One son gets the entire inheritance, and the other gets nothing. The explanation was that it should be passed through to blood relatives only. So that was the day he found out he was adopted. Edit. A lot of people asked what happened. I only heard of this through a friend, so I don't have the full story, but the reason it went to a lawyer, the person I know, was that it was being contested, so the disinherited son had to contest. I believe over the amount it was settled out of court. Story 18. I don't read wills, but here are some fun ones. Leaving money to cats/dogs/parrots. Expressly leaving nothing to one child. Leaving things to museums and galleries who do not want them. No one wants your bad paintings. Leaving things in joint ownership of people who hate each other. Well, I mean, to give an example. Kid 1, parents pay for a $20,000 wedding and contribute $10,000 to her house. Kid 2 borrows $30,000 from parents and never pays it up. Kid 3 doesn't get or borrow anything. Parents leave more money to Kid 3 than Kid 1 or 2, expressly saying it's because they already gave other two kids money. For the most part, people don't just disinherit an adult child for no reason. Giving reasons prevents people from arguing a mistake was made and is helpful for closure for the kids who might forget or not know how much money parents spent on their kids. Story 19. To my daughter Anne, who created my beautiful granddaughter Jane, and her dear fourth husband John, I leave $1, you greedy people. To Jane I leave all of my monetary assets, save $5,000, and my best gun, which I leave to my son Bill, on the condition that he confronts John during the time between my funeral and my burial. Jane, bail your uncle out of jail, please. Other than names, this is the exact wording of a great uncle's will, part of it anyway. At age 9, Jane told her mother that John had harmed her, and her mother told her she made a mistake. So great-uncle took Jane in and raised her, and his 2 kids got exactly what it says. His son also got a truck and technically a house, although he only kept it until Jane was a legal adult and could afford the tax on it. Bill got full custody of Jane when his father died, and he put every penny of her money into a trust fund to mature when she was 25 because he felt like his sister would try to get the money. He was right. And in case anyone wondered, yes, Bill got his $5,000. He didn't get arrested, though, because John had a warrant on him, so they didn't dare call the cops. Bill did kindly inform the police of his whereabouts a few weeks later. Story 20. When I was a clerk in law school at the State Court of Appeals, the adult children of a rich woman tried to invalidate the will. Basically, the woman was worth about $8 million, and all the children were working professionals earning 6 or 7 figures. Well, the woman had used the same hairdresser for multiple years, and left a considerable amount in a trust for the hairdresser's children's education. The remainder of the estate was given to different charities. Basically, the kids were mad they didn't get a cut. Edit. A lot of people asking how it turned out. Truth is, I don't know. We remanded on some procedural issues, and I never followed up on it. Story 21. I once had to tell the son of the deceased that his mother's priceless boy with apple painting was willed to a hotel concierge. Edit. Spelling. Story 22. My estate planning professor told us about a guy who had 2 families, neither of which knew about the other until it was time to read the will. This wasn't like a love child/mistress type scenario. Both were nuclear multi-kid families. Both families showed up for what had to be one of the most awkward will reading in history. I don't really know how he pulled it off, other than that he was away on business frequently. Story 23. In my trusts and estates class in law school, we read a case about a man who left everything to his wife, but only if she got his body preserved in a museum-like display and left it in the living room. Luckily for her, the court invalidated that part of the husband's will. If I recall correctly, part of the reasoning was that it would make it impossible for her to date/remarry if she had her husband's preserved body on display for anyone who came to see her. Story 24. Probate trial lawyer for over 30 years here. Once had a will where decedent, who was mentally ill, made a will disinheriting his wife and children and leaving his estate to the federal government because his delusions made him think that was necessary. We filed a will contest, and when we served it, a lawyer from the Department of Justice called and said no way that guy had capacity. No one leaves their estate to the gov if they are sane. We stipulate that the will is invalid. Story 25. I've seen a couple instances where people complained about their families in the body of the will. I'm not leaving anything to my irresponsible brother. I've also seen an instance where someone tries to leave stuff to their dog, not set up as a trust or anything, just trying to give the dog an inheritance. Story 26. I dealt with a very ill trust beneficiary a few years ago that was dying of rectal cancer. He was the beneficiary of a special needs trust that started with about $5 million at its inception. His daughter was the trustee. Every month she paid his rent and sent him $3,000. About 5 years into this trust admin, she called him and asked if he cashed the check she sent. He told her that he was going to the bank at the end of the week. She told him not to because the check would not clear, and his rent would not be paid. He called me. When this happened, I called the daughter and asked where the money was, as there should still be $5 million in the bank. She told me that it was gone, and that her dad was never supposed to live this long. I was shocked. Unfortunately, he died before Adult Protective Services did anything about it, and we never found out exactly where the money went. But he ended up homeless while his daughter lived in a $2 million house that her husband paid cash for. Story 27. I am currently going through a horrible trustee of a family trust horror story. Our father died, left the family trust splits equally among 5 kids. The oldest son is the trustee and he will not communicate with the 2 younger siblings. We have repeatedly requested accounting paperwork. He has not followed the trust at all. He did not take inventory of assets. He sold stocks and bonds but has not reported them. Says that there was no life insurance policy. He has not allowed 2 of the 5 trust beneficiaries on the property, which is owned by all beneficiaries in equal percentage. He will not give us full disclosure of what was funded in the trust. The attorney that he has that is supposed to be telling him what he should be doing legally, his fiduciary duty, is actually telling him that he does not have to talk to the beneficiaries. My father has been funding the trust since July of 2019. Same attorney that my father hired is the same attorney that my brother, the trustee, hired. Is that not a conflict of interest? Story 28. Please people, be gentle as I post this. My father's estate is a huge mess. My father supposedly took his own life. Later, we found out someone was trying to get his possessions, and he was blackmailed and scared. The day we buried my father, his worker came to the funeral and said my father sold her all his 8 expensive horses for $5,000 cash. My father had a house, and there was a renter inside. I had to spend 6 months in litigation to get him out. I had the sheriff lock him out. The house was completely trashed, with over $200,000 to $300,000 worth of damage. This after the judge basically gave him $25,000 free in back rent owed. Landlords are basically screwed, I guess. Still fighting a difficult woman who actually stole his horses the day he died and fighting her in court. The legal system is insane. I never knew that trusts had to prove ownership of possessions, so I have to fight her legally. Worst part is, the attorneys want to drag everything out for their own benefit and want more and more money when they don't do anything. Stressed and don't know when things will end, but trying to make it through. Story 29. I'm not a lawyer, but my dad put something really weird in his will. Last year, at 17, I was the recipient of a rock thrown at my head. I owed it to my dad's quirky sense of humor, and he probably thought it would be the funniest thing ever. And it was. It wasn't any special rock. It was one you'd find at the bottom of a river. This year I was reading some of the stuff he had written, as I was never allowed to see the will being that I was too young at the time and didn't think he'd end up dying. Regardless, the note under my name and recipient items I was to get if he died was, "Throw this rock at and hit him in the head with it, but make it surprising." I thought, what kind of a will is this? Then I read a little further, and he had left a note saying this is the rock that I had hit him in the head with when he was teaching me how to skip rocks when I was younger. I hit him so hard it dented his skull above his ear, and it never really healed. It was the most meaningful thing he'd ever done, and after all the years my dad and I had messed around with each other, it was his way of winning and taking the final crack at me. It was so heartfelt it moved me to tears. He got the last laugh, and I was completely okay with it. Story 30. Not a lawyer, but when my dad was growing up, there was this little old lady across the street without any family. She was from Finland, and her husband died during World War II. She immigrated to the States and had no one. So my grandparents would knock on her door to chat, take her grocery shopping, etc. They made my dad and brother help out around her house and yard. She loved my dad and uncle, treated them like her own kids, and gave them cookies, treats, and presents. When Dad was in Vietnam, she would record his voice messages on tapes and send them to him with letters, telling him what life was like in the neighborhood and how she hoped he'd be home safe soon, that she prayed for him, etc. When he came home, he'd stop by to chat and help out around the house, bring her macaroons, and just sit and talk for a while. One day, Ms. Lingard died, and a lawyer called my grandparents. She had left them a sizable amount of cash and stock and her paid-off house to my dad and his brother. My family had thought she was penniless. Never underestimate. Story 31. Oh man, I have a story, obligatory, not a lawyer. My great-grandfather was a worker on a man's farm for about 20 or so years, never missed a day, and always stayed late. The farm owner's son was arrogant, spoiled at the thought of a made life, and treated the workers very poorly. When the owner died, my great-grandfather was called to the will reading, which he thought was strange, but of course he went. The farmer's son sat at the table all smug at his inheritance, only to have the lawyer read that my great-granddad had actually inherited the farm, all equipment, and any estate money. I wish that portable cameras were popular back then so I could have seen his face. But the lawyer's family are still our lawyers for the estate today, and they say he really enjoyed reading that part, lol. Story 32. Not a lawyer, but I worked with plenty of estates and trust accounts over the years. This particular scenario isn't so much about the will itself being strange, but the circumstances that led up to the trust account being opened. I used to work at a bank in the estates department. I was an administrator who had to manage the files, including encroachments upon the capital, i.e., I want to take some money out now, please. I had this one account, a multi-million-dollar trust for one single beneficiary, the son of the deceased. What's unusual is that the son had killed his parents. He pleaded insanity. He would call once a year from the penitentiary/mental hospital, requesting $50 for commissary to buy chips and gum. The call was always strange. He was very polite and under medication. The quality of the call was always very tinny, like he was far away from the phone. Story 33. Not a lawyer, but but I administered trusts and estates for 35 years with a large national bank. I had one trust where the trustor left a significant amount of money to her grandkids. They received all the income from the trust assets over the years, and the trusts were fully distributed to them at age 35, except for one grandson. The trust originally included a provision requiring certain conditions to be met each year in order for him to receive his funds. If the conditions were not met, the funds would be withheld until compliance was verified. We used to just get a signed statement from the grandson each year, and that was enough for the probate court to approve the annual accounting for the trust and the further disbursement of funds. After a few years, courts started approving negating trust provisions that seemed overly controlling for a trustee to enforce. The beneficiary and the bank went to court, and we asked that the provision no longer be followed. The judge agreed that it was too much quote, control from the grave and allowed the provision to be struck down. Story 34. I used to work for an accountant, and we used to make wills as well. An old man, probably around 70, left all his money to his mistress, while his wife only got the goldfish. I had to tell him that if his wife contested it, she would most definitely win, but he said he didn't care. Edit, used to, twice in previous sentences. If there is a lawyer on this forum, can you please answer some of these questions? We did a little section on law while doing my accounting degree, and to my knowledge, the wife has a high chance of winning the case. For example, if all he had was furniture in the house and the house itself, then the wife would get it all regardless of what the will said. Just to clear up confusion, I'm referring to Australia, not the United States of America. I thought it was in there, but it wasn't. Story 35. My maternal grandpa was wealthy. He divorced my maternal grandma, remarried, and promptly dropped dead of a heart attack. He was only 48 and had no will, so everything went to his new wife, my mom's stepmother. She was actually really nice and was planning on making sure that everything was fair, till she died in a car accident 6 months later. She was a widow herself prior to marrying Grandpa and had a now orphaned 15-year-old son from the previous marriage who got everything. My mom and her siblings had to go to the auction at their childhood home and buy back as much of their heirlooms and memories as they could afford and, truthfully, stole some of what they couldn't. Story 36. This large French farmer's family had been fighting each other for 15 years over their parents' estate. Everything and anything had been a weapon in this all-out war. Debts, spoils, barns, plots, cows, wills, and whatever. Defeats followed victories. Failures followed compromises, but progress was being made, and at some point the dispute zone turned to a standstill. Everything was agreed as long as no one talked about antiques, jewelry, furniture, kitchenware, photographs, laundry, or tools. A long, protracted period ensued, any goodwill tentatively and harshly discouraged before even being aired. Time went on with no issue in sight. Then someone suggested they just drag all the stuff into the farm's courtyard, pour petrol on it, and burn it all. Everyone agreed. Story 37. Obligatory, not a lawyer, but I heard this story from a woman who used to work at a funeral parlor. Apparently there was this rich old woman, ROB from here on out, and her family had been waiting for her to die for a bunch of years so they could get her money. Real difficult people, and Robe hated them. But I guess she either didn't have anyone else to leave her money to, or she figured that her family would contest the will if everything wasn't left to them. Knowing how status-conscious these relatives are, ROB decided, fine, they can have the money, but I'm going to make them follow my instructions exactly. When Robe finally passed away, her lawyer approached the family with her instructions for how her funeral was to be run. According to Robe's will, the only way they get the money is if they follow these instructions to the letter. I don't remember all the absurd details except for the piece de resistance. Rob required an open casket funeral with all family members in attendance and demanded that her corpse be dressed up like Bozo the Clown. Makeup, red nose, crazy hair, massive shoes, the works. The family tried to protest, but Rob's lawyer had tied this thing up perfectly. They either attended the Bozo the Clown funeral, or they didn't get a dime, so they did it. The family members had to stand there for hours, glowering, taking weird looks from all their friends and neighbors as people got close to the casket and realized Rob was dressed like a clown. According to the funeral parlor employee, who had dressed ROB and applied the makeup, the best part of the service came when they tried to shut the casket and couldn't because the massive shoes got in the way. They had to bend these 24-inch shoes in half to get the lid closed. I never had the honor of meeting the brilliant, cantankerous old woman, but she's one of my biggest heroes. Too long. Didn't read. If you want to close a casket when the corpse is wearing clown shoes, you have to bend the shoes in half. Story 38. Not a lawyer, but my significant other's father was, and he always said his favorite story was of this old money lady he knew. She was worth around 15 million and had 5 kids, one of whom married a horrible man, who would spout the most offensive things against anyone that wasn't a white, rich, able-bodied Christian male. When she died, each child got 3 million, except for the other child's spouse. She donated that money to things like historically black colleges and universities, Planned Parenthood, the Special Olympics, her local synagogue, food banks, and other charitable causes, because she felt they both deserved to not inherit money due to their behavior and attitudes. If you feel unsafe with your thoughts, please seek professional help. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education,